On today's show, it's May 1st, May Day, and the Occupy Wall Street movement is in the midst of a general strike. All day today, we'll be getting live updates from all the major strikes, marches, and rallies happening across the U.S. Some labor groups are looking to occupy bridges, roads, and other transportation arteries, but this isn't the first time that demonstrators have taken over infrastructure as a protest strategy. We'll tell you why. And speaking of history, activists chose May 1st for a reason. Well, we'll review the significance of May Day to workers around the globe. I'm Jared Jacquet Mayer. This is Occupy the Media's special event May Day coverage. Thanks for tuning in to Occupy the Media's special May Day coverage. May 1st has historically been an international day honoring the labor movement. Last December, the group Occupy Los Angeles proposed a general strike on May 1st. No work, no school, no housework, no shopping, and taking it to the streets. The idea spread through the movement and now is at the core of what has been dubbed the Occupy Spring. It's a big enough deal that Free Speech TV is devoting 4 hours of coverage live from our Denver studio. We're also teaming up with the likes of Alternet, Yes Magazine, In These Times, Making Contact, Truthout.org, just to name a few, to give you live reports throughout the day. But we can't do this show without the help of our viewers. In just a little bit, we'll be taking your calls. So to join the conversation, call us toll-free at 877-575-FSTV. Groups in over 100 cities are taking part in May Day general strikes and events today, and we want to know what's going on in your hometown. The lines are open, so let's get started with the latest May Day news and actions from around the country. In New York, picketers are marching outside a Chase Bank branch on 40th Street. Their message, pay your taxes. It's a reminder to the bank that it didn't pay any taxes last year. Some arrests are already taking place in New York City, where protesters were occupying the Williamsburg Bridge. It connects Manhattan to Long Island. We'll bring you updates on that story as news comes in. Also in New York City's Bryant Park, former Rage Against the Machine guitarist Tom Morello is leading a march. He's joined by about 1,000 guitarists. According to reports from independent media outlets, airport workers and labor supporters in California have joined the general strike and are picketing outside terminals at the Los Angeles International Airport. Occupy LA activists have started their Four Winds March. Activists will be walking from the four corners of the city and converging in and around downtown Los Angeles' financial district. Well, that's it for headlines. You can also find more updates at mediaforthe99percent.com. There you'll get reports and updates on what's happening in cities across the nation. So let's get started, but first let's take a minute to dig into the history of May Day. Sitting here in our studio today are Sarah Van Gelder, executive editor of Yes Magazine, and Marcy Miranda, FSTV news producer. We've also got Hector Figueroa on the phone line from New York. He's the secretary-treasurer of the SEIU Local 32J. Hector, how you doing there in New York? Hi, Hector, are you on the line?
Yes, hi, how are you?
Hi, we're doing great. Before we start, I want to ask you just to give us some context about the history of May Day, but from where you are in New York, what can you tell us about what's going on there in the city as far as May Day protests and demonstrations? Hi, Hector. Oh, looks like we lost Hector. Almost. Hey, Hector, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, can you give us a take about what's happening there in New York City in terms of the May Day protests and demonstrations?
Well, what's happening today is that for the first time, the two perhaps most significant movements of the last few years, the movement for immigration reform and the movement for the 99%.
All right, looks like we're having some problems with the phone line there. Hector, hold on one sec till we can turn that down. Hi, Hector, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we'll get back to Hector in a second because it seems like there's some technical problems already, but this being live TV, you have to expect that. But Sarah, the history of May Day, a lot of people here in the U.S. have probably never even heard of May Day, but around the globe, it's a major holiday.
That's right, Jared, and it was started actually in the United States, in Chicago in 1886 with the Haymarket demonstrations, which became the Haymarket Massacre. At the time, the workers were trying to get the 8-hour day, which we take for granted right now, but at the time that was a big struggle, is just to be able to get to the point where we could have days that were just 8 hours instead of 10 or 12 hours. And it's been picked up around the world. People all in 80 different countries celebrate May Day as a workers' holiday. Somehow in the United States here it's gotten lost. We renamed it, I believe, Loyalty Day, and it was renamed Law Day in the Eisenhower administration. So it's kind of gotten lost, and then it was kind of moved over to September for Labor Day and became, a day to have a good barbecue, but not a, that's right, but not a political day. So it's really interesting now that the immigrant rights movement, and now between Occupy and the labor movement, we are essentially reclaiming May Day.
And so, Marcy, talk a little bit about that. How did, in recent years, May Day actually become associated with the immigrants' rights movement?
I think it started in 2006 when a lot of immigrants and immigrants' rights groups got together and were really pushing for reform. This was right before Bush was going to, get out of office, and it seemed like that was the last opportunity that they would have, for who knows how long.
Reform, and a lot of people might remember those rallies.
They were
really
huge.
Surprised so many people that
they were
tens of thousands,
millions in some places like Los Angeles, really to come out and show their support. And I think that's when a lot of people started remembering May Day. And I think the importance of today is also that that's why it is important for the Occupy movement. They're saying immigrants are part of the 99%, and labor is definitely part of the 99%. Workers, and today's I think a day of celebration for them to really remember that, and hopefully a launching point for this American spring that they've been training for the last couple of months.
And so, what do you think about this, Sarah, in terms of May Day now being associated with the Occupy Wall Street movement and also the immigrants' rights movement? Does it kind of rebrand May Day for a new generation? Something that's different the way people might think of it as some crusty old historic holiday.
Well, absolutely. I think it's reclaiming a really important holiday, but it's also bringing it into the present and into the future, because it's not only about big demonstrations, although it is that. It's also about creating liberated spaces, creating free spaces where people can do teach-ins and where they can have the really, really free markets and where they can celebrate, and where we can begin to start creating the space where we can start saying, well, what kind of world do we want to build? Not only what do we not want, we don't want this domination by the 1%, we don't want domination by the big banks, but what kind of world do we want to create ourselves?
Okay, I'm going to see, Hector, are you back on the line now?
Yes, I'm back on the line. Thank you.
You were talking a little bit about what is happening there in New York. We're out here in Denver, and a lot of people on the West Coast. What's the scene like there?
Well, the thing here is that activists, members of unions, workers in general are gathering in Union Square. They're coming from the two most recently dynamic movements we've seen in the country, the 99% Occupy Wall Street activism and the movement for immigrant rights. And the demands we have today is that all workers, all people, should really have rights. In this country, we are demanding workers to be able to legalize, workers to have the right to join unions, to unionize, and workers to organize at the community level so we can exercise democracy for the benefit of the 99%.
And so, Hector, you're with the SEIU, the Service Employees International Union. How is it that the union has tell us about your members, first off, and then tell us about how they're actually getting involved in some of the May Day demonstrations today.
Sure. Our members come from 64 different countries and speak over 20 different languages. They are largely immigrant workers from Ireland to Latin America to Asia who do service work in property buildings, from commercial office buildings to stadiums, museums, and also government buildings. And they're coming today to join the demonstrations. We traditionally every year have been participating on the demands for immigrant rights and comprehensive immigration reform. And this year, with the developments of the 99%, demands of Occupy Wall Street, we are very happy, very proud that we can join.
And so a lot of different groups are involved with the May Day activities, and a lot of different, being involved in different ways. And some of the goals of activists today are to take over transportation infrastructure. In New York, protesters were planning to block Manhattan-bound bridges and tunnels. Labor groups from all across the country are heading up actions like these today. What we know now, as news is coming in, we have heard that in San Francisco, the San Francisco ferry has been shut down, reports of that, and also actions occurring at the Williamsburg Bridge. But Sarah, in terms of giving context to some of these actions, and as we know, we don't know exactly what's happening right now as news reports come in, but occupying transportation infrastructure, is that why do that? And is that something that's effective or been effective within the labor movement?
Well, certainly in the Occupy movement, if you look at last year's occupation of the Brooklyn Bridge, that was really where the Occupy movement really came out and became a major force and got a lot of
where
attention.
Some 700 people were arrested.
Exactly,
on the
and I think the arrests, in fact, were in many ways what caused that level of attention. But they did shut down the bridge for a time, and as we're hearing, they did shut down the ferries just recently today in San Francisco. They chose not to occupy and shut down the Golden Gate Bridge because the unions involved, the transportation and bridge workers, asked that they not shut it down. But there are pickets going on around the San Francisco Bay Area in collaboration with those unions.
And Marcy, there was also last year in Oakland activists shutting down the port there. What about when did that happen? Do you recall?
That was in October, late October, early November. I can't recall, but they were successful in doing that. And actually, the Occupy Portland called for another shutdown of major ports in February, which occurred also, and that was all across the West Coast. You had, from Seattle up north down to Los Angeles and Long Beach in Southern California. You had people, and even I think in Houston and Texas, across the ports, it was this call for shutting it down, for a day of striking to really bring attention to this and hit corporations where it hurts the most.
Now, Hector Figueroa, can you talk a little bit about the SEIU's participation in some of the New York protests? Were there discussions early on about how the SEIU and its members would be involved in some of these actions? Did the SEIU to make a decision to participate in some actions but not others, like, let's say, occupying or shutting down certain transportation arteries? Hi, Hector. Are you there? Looks like we may have lost Hector again there in New York on the phone line there, but let's talk a little bit more about what we're seeing today in terms of some of the actions going on. As we noted earlier, the San Francisco ferry has apparently been shut down. The Williamsburg Bridge, there have been a few arrests, but large gatherings there.
Yeah, and police actually closing off traffic on the Williamsburg Bridge. This is, I don't know if this is because of occupiers or not, but the fact that they've gone and they've shut down traffic is going to cause some sort of disruption. So I think in a way, and if I was an occupier, I would see that as a win of sorts, because if that was their intent, then they got it. Even if they didn't do it themselves and the police felt it was necessary, it's gonna cause some people to pay attention, and that's ultimately, I think, their goal.
Yeah, what do you think, Sarah?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we should broaden out the conversation a little bit too, because there's been so many different kinds of targets. There's the people picketing outside the banks and working on at least disrupting business as usual at the big Bank of America, Chase Manhattan Bank. There's the foreclosure actions. One of the four winds that are converging in Los Angeles, they're doing foreclosure actions as they go because so many millions.
Well, what do you mean by a foreclosure action?
Well, I've yet to see what the actual details of that will be, but what they've been doing in many places is they'll actually go to a house that's being foreclosed and occupy it and prevent the banks from being able to actually evict the tenants. In other places, they've actually gone into empty houses that were foreclosed on and found some homeless families who need some homes and made a nice match. Actually opened up those homes and settled homeless families in those homes. So I don't know what form this is going to take in Los Angeles. All I know at this point is that there were foreclosure actions.
And we should say that there are many means in which we're trying to receive news from multiple different sources. We have our partners with the Media Consortium who are out there gathering different news. We're trying to aggregate a lot of that and bring that into our coverage here. But if people go to mediaforthe99%.com, is that the website, Marcy? It's a really cool map there where city by city you can see what the latest news is that's happening. So we should probably take some calls and give our viewers a chance to weigh in. Give us a call at 877-575-FSTV. What do you think is the significance of labor groups taking over streets and bridges today? We're calling this a telephone mic check. Okay, and so again, our phone number, our lines are open, so we really want to hear from all of our viewers out there in terms of what actions are you seeing going on? What do you think the significance of May Day is in 2012? Is it a holiday that's a bit irrelevant, or does it actually speak to you in terms of all the major issues that are happening in the U.S. today? So, Marcy, let's talk a little bit more about some of the actions that had been planned for several months by Occupy Wall Street activists and various partners, and what do they actually hope to accomplish today? Why focus on May 1st?
Well, I mean, the fact that a lot of people in the mainstream corporate media keep saying, well, the movement's dead, because they were really active in the fall and they had a lot going on, and then in the winter things kind of simmered down a little bit, and you know, the movement certainly didn't go away. They were just kind of underground. They were planning a lot for this day, for today actually, when they really want to come out again. It's a resurrection of sorts, and like we were saying before, it's become such a historic day when people are starting to associate it with immigrants' rights, you know, and reclaiming that idea of labor and our right as workers. And you know, I think, I don't know much about the Haymarket Square, which is kind of what started this whole day, but from what I do know, you know, like Sarah was saying, it's people who are saying we've had enough. You know, workers who are saying we need some change, and I think that's what the movement is about so much itself as well. So it's really perfect that you know, this group of folks who come out and say we are the 99% and we're tired of the 1% ruling us, coming out and saying on this day when workers said we've had enough, we are saying we as the 99% have had enough.
And it was really interesting, May Day, Sarah, is when you look at the history of May Day, it parallels the history of labor within the United States and its rise and its fall and its relationship to the employers and sort of the elites in the country. But we've been talking about some of these major actions, taking over infrastructure, protesting, shutting down banks, but there are other ways that people are choosing to celebrate May Day and do some different types of educational demonstrations. Right. Is there any that popped in mind for you?
Well, it's interesting because another whole group besides the people who are workers are, of course, people who are not workers. Among them are students. And we just had this big day, they called it T1, which is when student debt hit $1 trillion. So students are just, you know, they're really up against it in terms of taking on enormous debt loads in order to get the education that everyone says you have to have in order to get a decent job. And then when they come out of school, there's no way that they're getting the kinds of jobs that they need to be able to pay those off. So one of the things that's happening is there's a number of student groups that are actually doing walkouts from their high schools and colleges, and they're having a free university. I believe it's at Bryant Park, it's in New York. I believe they're having a free university today, and they're going to be doing their own classes, their own teaching, and doing it for free, and saying, you know, education belongs to we the people. You know, we need to be teaching each other. I believe there's professors from CUNY, City University of New York, who are participating in that. So people will be teaching each other.
And we should throw that out there, that viewers out there, anyone watching on the TV or streaming live there at freespeech.org, find a way to hit us up on Facebook or Twitter at FreeSpeechTV and tell us what are the actions that you're participating in, what are the ones that you want to bring attention to, and we'll try to find a way to give that a shout out in the show. We actually have a caller on the line. It is Amin from North Carolina. Amin, am I pronouncing that right? You're on Occupy the Media. Seems like we're having some trouble with the callers today. Amin, in North Carolina, are you there? Okay, Marcy, other types of ways that people are participating in May Day and trying to bring a more educational element to.
Yeah. Well, I know here in Denver, Occupy Denver is actually planning a march and a rally, and they're going to go down to Civic Center Park, which is a big park downtown in Denver, and they're going to have the rest of the day up until dusk, teach-ins and lectures, and kind of like Sarah was saying, bringing that awareness and that education. We've had a lot of professors out here in Denver, and I'm sure in other occupations as well, who have really come out and said, you know, we are a part of the 99%. We kind of want to want to work with you, and I think that's absolutely critical for the movement as well.
Okay, let's shift our focus a little bit. One of the big issues of the Occupy movement is income inequality. Up next, we'll talk about the growing divide in pay between CEOs and the working class. But first, we want to hear from our social media viewers. Have you or anyone you know ever participated in a May Day event? What difference can an event like this make? To join the conversation, post your comments online at Facebook and Twitter.
Before the march, a dance revolution broke out in Franco Gowa Plaza.
What's wrong with the world, mama? People living like they ain't got no mamas. I think the whole world's addicted to the drama, only attracted to things that are.
When you throw away money on wasted electricity, you're throwing away everything you could have bought with it. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at energysavers.gov.
What is the newly renewed Occupy Wall Street going to look like, and how are they going to be behaving, do you think?
It's going to be more radical. I mean, I think it's going to call for different stuff from what you just mentioned. The prevailing chant that happens most frequently now and from the most number of people, which didn't used to be so, goes, anticapitalista. Now, anti-capitalism isn't a very specific ideology, but it is a definite rejection of the reigning ideology, and I think that it dovetails nicely with your history lesson there, because what's important to note about the New Deal is that it took place at a time. It wasn't just Roosevelt who did it, although he did say, I welcome the bankers' hatred. The reason he said that is because he was pandering to a really enraged leftist movement. I mean, there were hundreds of thousands of Communist Party members at the time. So I think that a people's movement that calls attention to the depravity of the very system that reigns is what forced Roosevelt's hand. And as you know, he said, go out and make me do it. So the fact that Occupy Wall Street is now chanting that it's anti-capitalist, although I'm sure that's not true to a person, that is an encouraging sign given your historical parallel. Radical ideas become mainstream as conditions get worse and worse. And we're looking at a spring that might bring insolvency to Bank of America, that might roll out indictments from Eric Schneiderman's investigation, that might see Greece pull out of the euro and the devaluation of that currency and its reverberations on the dollar. A lot is at stake this spring. Of course, Israel might bomb Iran and throw the whole commodities market into chaos. So as conditions get crazier and crazier, the people will try. I mean, as Milton Friedman said, that when things change is when there's crisis, and the way that they change is prescribed by the ideas lying around. So if Occupy Wall Street is an idea that's lying around and is an accessible alternative to more capitalism, which is the response that we gave the bailouts in fall of 2008, sure, I think you could probably see some really big change. But it won't be easy, as the cops showed.
You're watching Free Speech TV, a network powered by the people.
Have love to set it straight. Take control of your mind and meditate. Let your soul gravitate to the love, y'all. Where is the love? Where is the love? Where is the love?
It just ain't the same. Always in change. New days are strange. Is the world insane? If love and peace is so strong, why are the pieces of love that don't belong? Nations.
Welcome back to Occupy the Media. I'm Jared Jakang-Mayer, and I'm joined in studio with Sarah Van Gelder, executive editor of Yes Magazine, and FSTV's Marcy Miranda. In this segment, we're also joined by Kim Langle, a reporter with Regional News Network TV in New York. She's with us over the phone. Kim, how's it going in there in New York?
Hi, Jared. Well, you wouldn't believe the crowds that we've been seeing all morning and all afternoon here in Bryant Park. Now, they've assembled. We have the drum circle going. We have the guitar army of probably 50 guitars playing and chanting. It's really quite a sight. And we're told that there's been some police action in a bunch of different parts of New York City, and people are sort of floating back and forth between Bryant Park and Union Square. And we're actually on our way to Union Square right now. That's where the labor unions and the immigrants' rights movement is meeting. They're going to meet up with Occupy Wall Street later on.
And so, Kim Langle, give us an idea of the geography there. So we have Bryant Park and Union Square and then Wall Street. What does this look like on the island, and where are most people situated right now?
So if you think of Manhattan as sort of a finger-shaped island, Bryant Park, Union Square, Zuccotti Park are sort of on the lower end of the island, and certainly you also can't forget about the New York Stock Exchange. Now, the idea behind the movement in New York City is that in the morning they hit Bryant Park, then they move south to Union Square, then Zuccotti Park and the New York Stock Exchange later in the evening. And the idea is that as more and more people join in, they would in effect be clogging the streets of New York City, thus causing a general strike and making it hard for people to get to work and go shopping and, do the normal things they would be doing that day, because the purpose is to really make people think about what May Day is and really reconnecting back into this idea of 99%.
Okay, Kim, stay on the line because I want to get your take on this. Our first topic, which is about executive compensation. Now, heads of big corporations have always gotten big paychecks, but in recent decades, the gap between what CEOs are paid and what the average employee is paid has grown wider and wider. And Sarah, the issue of income inequality, but particularly when we look at Wall Street and just the obscene amounts of executive compensation that some of these executives are getting, that's really one of the things that's at the core of the frustration and anger within the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Absolutely. I mean, I think most people don't mind if some executives make more money than they do. But when it gets to something like 350 to 1, and when the one, which is actually the 99%, the ordinary people who are working every day for a living, when our wages haven't gone up to speak of in decades, so the people are barely keeping up with inflation. I mean, you look at how people coped before, and they coped before by having more and more hours at work, by having the two adults in the family getting jobs, and then they coped by going deeper and deeper into debt and using their house as a collateral so they could go into debt. And then with the financial crash, neither of those strategies worked anymore. So suddenly people in the 99% are really stuck. And so I think that's one of the places where you see so much frustration, is that the basic underpinnings of having a middle class, a basic standard of living, are being taken away from us at the same time as the 1%, as the salaries, the compensation packages for CEOs just keeps going up. And by the way, the most recent report on that is that of the top 10 CEO compensation packages, 3 of them are in the healthcare industry. So when we think about how healthcare is bankrupting our country and really one of the biggest causes of this future deficit, Armageddon. Yep. One of the reasons is that we have this private healthcare industry that is overcompensating people.
And so, Kim Langle, there in New York, the issue of anger over executive compensation and income inequality, how much does that fit into the motivation, as you see it, for some of these, for a lot of these Occupy Wall Street demonstrators? Is this an issue that's big on people's minds there?
It certainly is an issue that is huge on people's minds here. And one of the other things you have to consider with the occupation in New York that's sort of different from what's been going on in the West Coast is that in New York City, Occupy Wall Street hibernated pretty much between November and I would say March. They only really came out pretty big in April. And so a lot of people had really painted them in the corner of being completely against prosperity and completely against the question of, doing well really a result of capitalism or the 1%. Mm-hmm. And they've really come out today to reach out to the masses to say, most of us do really value capitalism. There is only a small percent of us in Occupy Wall Street against it. And we do want to see people prosper. We do want to see people do well, but we want to see it happen within the middle class. And they really don't like the fact that the middle class has been making as much as they used to. They're working longer hours. They're more tired, and they haven't been able to do as well as they have in the past. They want to see that bump happen in the middle class.
So you don't have to be a Haymarket radical to feel this anger or frustration, and just the general issue of fairness. It seems like that is one that binds all these together. We want you to join the conversation. What kind of changes do you think the May Day demonstrations can make for society? Give us a call at 877-575-FSTV or post a comment on our Facebook page. Last month, the unemployment rate dipped to 8.2%. Even so, this means about 7 million Americans are without jobs and collecting unemployment benefits. This doesn't even include the discouraged workers who have just given up looking for jobs. Sarah, tell us a little bit about unemployment, long-term unemployment, and how, from your perspective, this is really fitting into the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Well, I think what we've seen is a real change in the structure of the American economy, so that a lot of the emphasis of the business world has been on increasing productivity, and the idea of that is that it takes fewer people to produce the same amount of wealth, but that means a lot of people are excluded. So people who simply don't have jobs at all. And the way that the global capitalist system has worked is, of course, that those jobs tend to get sent overseas. They get sent to the lowest wage countries in the world. So we have this global race to the bottom. And unless people in this country are willing to work for, in some of the poorest wage areas, what you earn during the day is only enough to keep you alive for that day and not even to support a family. So unless you want that kind of global race to the bottom, you have to have mechanisms in place to keep jobs local. And we believe at Yes Magazine, we do a lot of work on this. We believe the way to do that is to really work on rebuilding our local economies.
Well, and talk a little bit more about that, because you've in recent issues given examples of individuals who've created their own mini economies, mostly in some cases out of desperation because they've either lost jobs or needed to find an income.
Right. Well, actually that's how our economy was founded for, most of its history is in local economies. And the great thing about that is you keep wealth circulating locally. It means that you know what's going on in your local factory. You know the guy who runs the butcher shop or the person who, who brings you the produce. And so there's a sense of community, there's a sense of accountability. And now people are starting to bring that back because they're tired of their food traveling 1,200, 1,400 miles to get to them. They know that there's a lot of exploitation of farm workers that's built into that, as well as exploitation of Mother Earth, because the chemicals that are used on those fields are really devastating.
And so back to the issue of just inequality between the owners and CEOs and their workers. One example of this growing income divide is in Atlanta, where AT&T CEO made a fortune last year. He then announced his plan to lay off more than 700 workers. That is until Occupy Atlanta intervened. Here's an interview that Occupy the Media did with an activist from Occupy Atlanta.
Well, the truth is, layoffs at all are not acceptable. The CEO alone made $27 million only in bonuses last year. And additional to that, those opportunities that AT&T have stated that those that are laid off would have, they come with less benefits, with a much lower pay, and the majority of them are not even contract. And that's even at all if that offer is given, which is not guaranteed to every person that's laid off.
Well, now it's time to hear from our viewers. This is our telephone mic check.
Mic check! Mic check!
Okay, so we're still waiting for some callers at 877-575-FSTV. Give us a call. Tell us about what you think about income inequality, the growing rates of pay for CEOs and executives, and we'll patch you right in. We have Amin in North Carolina. Back to try it again. Amin, you're on Occupy the Media. Hi, Amin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi. So you have a question or comment for us about May Day in general?
Yes. I've been watching since the Occupy begins, and I really want to say that all these places that we have in California, New York, and all the places that we having this Occupy movement, why don't we all get together and walk straight to the Washington, D.C., where the changes should be made? And we don't live in a country that have regime or prince or queen or anything like that. That's how our fathers have created this amendment, so we can walk over there and change everything that needs to be changed.
So you would like to see a major march or some major actions occurring there?
That's correct. I'd like to see some major march. Everybody should get together and try to make changes out there.
And so, I mean, in North Carolina are there Occupy Wall Street groups or?
No, there is none in here, but in Virginia there is, and there's some part in Maryland and stuff like that. But if all of us get together, communicate with each other, and follow up with this thing, and go straight to the source.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot for your call, Amin. So a caller wants to see more focus on Washington, D.C., where a lot of these issues are decided, at least on the macro scale. But Marcy, that has been at least a debate within the Occupy Wall Street movement. Do we focus on the political system, or do we try to focus on other things and leave the politicians and electoral politics behind?
And I think that was one of, at the inception too, when people were calling for demands. What are the demands of this group? Which is what a lot of the corporate media was asking for. That was one thing that the movement said, we're not into politics. The system is broken, whether you're right or left, red or blue. And so they really see it as making change, like Sarah was saying, at the local level, where you can really get involved, where you can make a difference. So many people forget so often that where your vote counts the most is probably in your local elections, in your local school board meetings, city council ordinances, that kind of thing, which is definitely something that other corporate-backed interest groups are well aware of.
And let's go back to the phones, because from Occupy Seattle we have Mark Taylor on the line. Mark Taylor, you're on Occupy the Media.
Hi, this is Mark Taylor Canfield from the Occupy Seattle Media Working Group, and we unfortunately have a lot of tension building in Seattle right now because of some statements that have been made by Mayor Mike McGinn and also the Seattle Police Department about potential for violence here in Seattle today. The mayor posted something on his website last week, and ever since then the Seattle Times and the television media here have been talking up all this talk about violence. So earlier today, I had an opportunity to talk to a spokesperson from the Seattle Police Department on a public radio station here, and they were basically saying that it's almost like visions of the WTO demonstrations here again, where there are these unnamed sources and unnamed groups that are supposedly coming into town to cause problems.
So a lot of anxiety left over from the 1999 WTO protests in Seattle, which some have compared this this May Day event to. Mark, real quickly, just tell us though, what is the scene like there in Seattle right now?
I'm sorry, did you ask what?
Yeah, Mark, what does it look like there in Seattle? Is Occupy Seattle participating in protests? Is there a big police presence?
Well, right now people are starting to gather. We started serving breakfast at 9 o'clock in the morning at Westlake Park, which is our traditional Occupy Seattle encampment, where we were evicted last fall. And so far, there is some police presence, but one of the issues, that I voiced and some of the other Occupy Seattle folks have voiced is that we don't really want to see a huge police presence on the street with, the cops in riot gear and all of that kind of stuff, because it tends to intimidate people, and we want to get as many people down to our events as possible, because what we're doing is we're having 3 major marches today.
Okay.
As well as a day-long series of hip-hop concerts at Westlake Park.
Okay, well, Mark, I'm going to have to cut you off. Thanks a lot for calling in. That's Mark Taylor from Occupy Seattle. For any of these events that he mentioned, you can go to mediaforthe99percent.org. We have a list of all the different events that are going on in different cities. We have to take another quick break, but we want you to join the conversation when we get back. Give us a call at 877-575-FSTV. About 100 cities are participating in May Day events today. What's happening in your city? Post a comment on our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter. Stay with us.
It's evolution. Well, you know, we all want to change the world. But when you talk about destruction, don't you know that you can count me out?
Tune into Free Speech TV for Democracy Now!, a national, independent, award-winning news program bringing you people and perspectives rarely seen on corporate media.
In Greece, there are 800,000 people that work for the government now. It's a little country, and that's a big part of their job scene. You're going to cut 150,000 people from a payroll of 800,000 in a country whose current unemployment rate is 19.9%. This is lunacy. This is a way of crushing a society and making a kind of demonstration case for all Europeans and for Americans. This is an economic crisis, and we're going to solve the crisis on the backs of the poorest, most distressed part of the population. That's how we work in a capitalist system. That's who we victimize. And I think Americans ought to be very, very concerned. Certainly the rest of Europe is. Because this is a model that says we too in the United States are going to be thinking about cutting minimum wage, cutting back Social Security, cutting back, as almost every state and city are doing in our country, on public education, on public safety, and so on. So the Greeks are the advanced case being tested, how far you can push a population, so that other countries that are moving in that direction will have a clear idea of what best to do, what not to do. It's a little bit like an experiment, and it should give all of us real pause.
So you can't save money? That's easy as pie. Brown bag your lunch instead of going out. $6 save times 5 days a week times 10 years is $21,000. That's a lot of lettuce. Small changes today, big bucks tomorrow. Feedthepig.org.
Welcome back to Occupy the Media. I'm Jared Jakang Mayer, and I'm here holding down the encampment with Sarah Van Gelder, Yes Magazine's executive editor, and joining us is Matt Renner, director of development and communications for truthout.org. Also on the line is Kevin Gosztola. He's blogging for Firedog Lake from Chicago. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, so in a second we'll talk about the American Legislative Exchange Council, but first I wanted to get an update from Kevin there in Chicago, who's been monitoring what the mainstream media's coverage of the May Day protests have been. Kevin, what have you been seeing there on the Tube and other mainstream outlets?
What I looked at this morning indicated that the mainstream press were really going to dig into the sort of possibilities of violence, which is very disconcerting if you think about it, because it's a very easy way to marginalize what people are going out to do today. There was apparently something that happened in San Francisco with some vandalism. There was also some issues with police, the NYPD really hyping up the fact that there could be violence from Occupy Wall Street. And so together you see this coalescing to form a narrative that people should look out and be weary of whatever could happen. And then, of course, what happens is if, in fact, the protests are peaceful, there's this issue of, well, now the media is just going to talk about how law enforcement did a good job of preventing violence. And so you don't really get a discussion about the actual pickets and protests that took place during the day.
And of course, if there are situations where there is violence or vandalism that occurs, that is what makes the headlines. That's what gets the main news hook, right?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And this is just, you know, it's not very surprising, but it seems like, and I think this might largely have to do with either the culture of media or the fact that they do work for corporations, that they are subservient to corporations. I mean, because since day one, we've seen them inventing different viewpoints and reasons why people should be skeptical of Occupy, and never just reporting on what Occupy does, actually manufacturing different views about them and then creating issues such as like they don't actually have leaders or they don't have one message, even though it's quite clear when you hear Occupy Wall Street that they're against the excesses of Wall Street.
Okay, well, let's pivot topics a little bit away from the mainstream media and talk about one of our other favorite organizations, the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, the corporate backed group that pushes and even drafts legislation for conservative lawmakers. And I want to get everyone's take on this because in recent months we've seen ALEC's fortunes have changed and shifted pretty startlingly after the Trayvon Martin shooting and case. So first off, Matt Renner, what do you think about where ALEC is at now and sort of the backlash against this group?
Yeah, thanks for having me. ALEC is essentially where the corporatocracy goes to breed. I like to think of it as the confluence of corporate power and legislators from around the country meeting together behind closed doors to actually vote on legislation and set policy that they would then go and bring to their state legislatures and enact. They stepped on a couple of landmines because they've overreached in incredible ways, and finally it's coming into public consciousness what this group actually does. You have the Trayvon Martin example, where they're behind the laws that are essentially bringing back the Wild West atmosphere in these gun-toting states where people
gun laws like that. Yeah,
it can stand their ground supposedly, but it's more of a license to shoot each other. And then you also have this huge push by ALEC to limit voting and to create voter ID laws that are restrictive and potentially run contrary to the Constitution and disenfranchise especially minority and poor and immigrant communities.
And we're going to be talking more about some of these voter ID laws and immigrant and voter suppression laws later on in the show, but we want you to join the conversation. The number is 877-575-FSTV. This hour, we want to know what past May Days have been memorable for you. Call or post a comment on our Facebook page. Now, a little bit of a change in topic. Unlimited spending in elections is a fast track to corruption, and that's what we saw when the Citizens United decision gave rise to the super PACs. Well, opponents of the Supreme Court ruling are fighting for a return to grassroots democracy. And Sarah Van Gelder, I want to talk to you about this first because the super PACs, these kind of shadow groups that have dumped so much money into the Republican primary so far and now the presidential race is really waking people up to, wow, the Citizens United decision, its impacts are really staggering.
That's right. I mean, we saw this in the Republican primary where a few billionaires decided that they wanted this or that conservative candidate to stay in the race, and by God, they stayed in the race. So I think we're seeing just the beginning of that, and I think we started seeing the beginning of it actually in the 2010 midterm election as well. But it's really terrifying if you think about our democracy. It's always been overly influenced, in my view, by the people with big money. But now it's just so over the top, and this can all be done in secret. We don't know who is bankrolling these candidates. We don't know what their agenda is. And we, the people who actually have the votes and this democracy is supposed to be representing us, you know, how can we compete with unlimited spending? So I think that's why we're seeing this movement around the country, the move to amend the Free Speech for People, who are saying, you know, we have got to fix the Constitution. We have got to make it clear that what the founding fathers had in mind was not ruled by $1, one vote. It was ruled by we the people. We've got to fix this Constitution.
Kevin Gostola from Fire Dog Lake, amending the Constitution to close that loophole for the super PACs. What do you think about the chances for that, and what's the right way for people to approach overturning Citizens United?
Well, quickly, I think that the chances are very slim right now, just when you look at the reality of the fact that, you know, both political parties are really not into supporting ending corporate personhood or adopting the sort of money isn't speech issues that really go after corporations. And so that makes it all the more important that Occupy Wall Street and these movements be out there on May Day and in future days and in the coming months and throughout the election, actually making this a real issue that needs action.
Matt Renner, overturning Citizens United, do we go the route of pushing for a constitutional amendment?
I think that a constitutional amendment can be useful in terms of rallying people to the cause and spreading the word, and it's probably an issue that's going to take a while. I agree with Kevin that it's not likely with the current situation, but what we're seeing with Occupy, and why I think this ties together with Occupy and the discussion about ALEC, is that Citizens United has laid bare the reality that money is now the most important thing in elections. Corporations, ExxonMobil, if they wanted to, could dump $100 million a day, which is what they make in profits, into any election. And they could funnel it through shadow organizations so we would never know about it. I think that the move to amend is a great and noble undertaking. And I think what it is it's giving people voice and a rallying cry to say we no longer consent to corporatocracy. We want to rule ourselves.
Sarah, before we move on, any last takes on Citizens United?
Well, you know, what overturning Citizens United would do would be really essential, but the Occupy movement is actually taking democracy to a whole nother level with the way that they're doing general assemblies, they're doing organizing at the local level, they're doing consensus-based decision-making so that every voice is heard. And I think it's really interesting to think about this being a point at which not only are we not content with big money influencing our elections, but we're not even, you know, it's not even enough to go back to what it was pre-Citizens United. We need a much, much deeper form of democracy.
Yeah. Okay, it's now time for another mic check. Let's take some more calls from you, the 99%.
Mic check, mic check.
Okay, we have a caller on the line, David from Vermont, who wants to talk about how the mainstream media covers protests. David, you're on Occupy the Media.
Hi. We decided, just a couple of us, to go and stand outside Senator Leahy's office here in Burlington. And the media walked up and immediately wanted to, know what is our name, where do I work, so forth. I mean, I'm holding a sign that says on strike. So, I mean, they want some kind of comprehensive message, but the thing is, if the man's supporting health care, aggrandizing all over the nation about how he's going to give health care to people, he probably should give health care to the people that work in the building.
And so then what has this experience told you about the way that the mainstream media covers protests, whereas covering May Day?
Well, they've completely ignored, in this city at least, they've completely ignored. I mean, it's a very small contingent that's actually turning out here. I mean, we're hoping it's going to get better later. It's kind of rainy still. But
okay, well, David, thanks a lot for calling in and giving us the update about what's happening there in Burlington, Vermont. We're going to see if we can fit another call in, but Kevin Gostola, Firedog Lake, talk a little bit more about what you've been noticing in terms of the mainstream media's coverage of the actions that are happening today.
Well, I guess the thing that I would add additionally is that I saw an update on how, they're talking about the turnout. And this is something that you usually get in the reporting of protests. It's pretty routine that they'll judge the effectiveness of the protest based on the number of people. It's also rainy. That gives them an extra thing to latch onto to make it seem like what's happening isn't going to be effective at all. So, the bottom line is, follow programming like this, what Free Speech TV is doing, follow people who are talking on Twitter, and ignore the sort of messaging that's coming out from corporate media, because it isn't true. People actually care that people are out there today.
I like the sound of that, and we actually have another caller on the line, Michael from Missouri. Before we go quickly, do you have a comment or question for Occupy the Media? Hi, Michael in Missouri, you're on Occupy the Media, are you there? Okay, any final thoughts on mainstream media coverage of protests, Occupy Wall Street and May Day?
Well, the mainstream has been covering Occupy incorrectly since the very beginning, when they were insisting that demands come out of the movement, and first we're asking, what is Occupy protesting? As if they couldn't see the blatant inequality in our society and the increasing and probably never-ending unemployment crisis if we continue down this path. It's willful ignorance, in my opinion, and it's completely unacceptable. There's exceptions, But in order to dig in, you really need to be talking to people on the ground. And that's why reporters like people at Yes Magazine, our reporters at Truth Out, and the excellent people at Fire Dog Lake really need to be listened to, and people should use them as primary sources on this issue.
Sarah, quickly, I consume a lot of media, lots of different outlets, not just progressive independent media, but mainstream outlets too. But when you talk to people that don't have the time to follow every single blog like we do, but they're hearing about this coverage and they're hearing these things, what suggestions would you give them to say, here's how you should approach mainstream media coverage of progressive movements?
Well, I would agree that the places to go are the people that are more connected to the movement, because then I think you have the inside voice. And I just want to do a shout out to In These Times. When we go back to thinking about how ALEC was first outed, they did some extraordinary research to show that ALEC was conspiring with the private prison industry to get these really draconian anti-immigration laws that would succeed in filling up their private prisons. So In These Times did just some extraordinary coverage on that, and I think that's the kind of place we need to be looking.
Great. Well, that's all the time that we have for this hour-long block. I'd like to thank my guests this hour, Sarah Van Gelder, Executive Editor of Yes Magazine, Matt Renner, Director of Development and Communications for TruthOut.org. A big thanks to our remote guest as well, Kevin Gaztola, blogging for Fire Dog Lake Today from Chicago. On Facebook and Twitter, we asked our followers, what does May Day, also known as International Workers' Day, mean to you? Janice writes, I've always been confused about the meaning, but I still support and show my solidarity with fellow 99%ers. Terrence writes, I take it as a day to renew my commitment to workers' rights. Sarah says, May Day goes back to the Celtic festival Beltane, so I reflect on that also. Thanks for tuning in to our special edition of Occupy the Media. We're going to take a quick break, but stay with us. We have another full hour of coverage featuring the latest May Day news. We'll also talk about what a day would be like without any immigrant workers. Don't go away.